Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This has been a good show. We talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Nancy Drew, Season 4, Episode 9. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, a big part of this episode had Nancy and Nick paired up as they're kind of working on trying to figure out this whole Sin Eater situation. Like, right, we come up with the means in which we need to kill the Sin Eater, but the plan is like, right, we need to use a crossbow, but we need to also, so basically they're going to need to poison the Sin Eater with a concoction basically made from the first sin that it ever ate. So using a device that Nick made, they ultimately ended up finding out what the first sin was. That the founders of Horseshoe Bay are the ones who made, they didn't know what the first sin was, but they saw that the founders of Horseshoe Bay are the ones who made the Sin Eater. So that's kind of interesting, especially because you'd almost think they'd be two separate things, but it ends up connecting with what's going on with Bess's circumstances, because she's going to court for this whole litigation about her and everything, the charges that are being brought upon her. So George and Carson are there to represent her, mainly Carson, and George is kind of stepping in to kind of fill in kind of like a second seat type of situation. But then like the prosecutor is like, yeah, we're actually dropping the charges. I was like, that's weird. Oh, because now we're bringing up other charges on her, and that lady, I can't stand her. They said her name in the episode, but I'm also like, man, once again, nothing against the actress. It's like you were doing your best playing like a character you're meant to dislike. But once I talked about it before, I don't understand why she has such a hard-on for Bess. I wonder if we're going to find out, does she have some sins of her own that she don't remember? Like, it's got to be like, because the fact is, when someone goes this so hard in the pain about like, oh, being virtuous and blah blah blah, it's like, you know, they got some sins in their closets, got some skeletons in their closets. Like, because it doesn't make any, I mean, either she's so deluded in thinking she's such a good person because, you know, her sins might have been eaten along with the memories of it. So, but it's like, why go after Bess as hard as you have been? Because it's something I never really thought about before. It's like, well, I mean, the Historical Society has been here for like 20-some years without incident. Why is it all of a sudden it's an issue? It's only after Bess is taken over. Because I was thinking to myself, I'm like, the entire time Hannah was running things as the keeper, that was never an issue. But maybe, to be fair, I mean, I'm about to say, maybe some of the supernatural stuff, maybe Hannah kept that only like reserved to Nancy's crew about the supernatural. So like Bess is kind of leaking that out outwardly around the town, wanting to make everyone more aware of the supernatural and teaching them about the supernatural, the good that the supernatural can do. So maybe that's the difference between Bess and Hannah. Because like, why didn't Hannah ever really have a target on her back, you know? So like I said, it's only now. At least, I mean, I don't remember. Maybe it came up in like Season 1 and Season 2, and I'm just not remembering. But I don't remember it ever really coming up about Hannah like having to deal with any of that like issues, you know. So, but we find out so many interesting things. There's like a mural at the courthouse, and there's actually been multiple ones, like in I think other places outside of Horseshoe Bay. I don't think, because Nick had brought it up, but I don't remember if they're actually from Horseshoe Bay or whether they're just in other places. But maybe they existed in other places and it was done here in Horseshoe Bay. But we found out later on it was done in Horseshoe Bay to cover something up. So maybe it's just, it started in Horseshoe Bay, and then that phrasing and mural was put in other like courthouses and stuff like that. Like I said, I don't think it's in all in Horseshoe Bay. I think the others are just scattered around. Because we find out that Addie has a connection in all of this too, because it turns out that her the tribe she belongs to, basically her parents were told a story when they were kids by their parents and their grandparents about the history of this place, of what happened in Horseshoe Bay, that basically the courthouse sits on basically ground of like a tragedy, in which, not even a tragedy, a massacre, where so many were killed and native children were taken, and those stains still stain the wall, and though that type of like trauma and like, you know, it creates this psychic like scar on that place that can't be washed away. So that's what the Sin Eater was for. and they buried that and covered it up with this beautiful mural of like, oh, kind of representing like, oh, how good and awesome we were. It is that interesting history thing of like, right, when you're a kid, you hear about, oh man, good old Columbus sailed and discovered America. And then, you know, when you get older, that's when the truth of history comes out of, oh no, Columbus didn't discover anything. How you discover something that was already preoccupied by other people. Yeah, and you realize, oh man, Columbus was was straight up an asshole. So it's in that same mentality of like, this town is believed the good, which I'm also like, why would you believe your founders were good? It's like, oh, when was this town founded? Like in the 1800s or something like that, which I'm like, I don't know. That still puts it in that time frame of, yeah, like I by default, I would assume, hey, maybe that's my perspective. I can only speak for this country, but it's like, you know, what this country was founded on, there was not a lot of good. So that's why I think it's so interesting. I'm like, I would assume any town's founding would come from some heat, especially like come with some tragedies. And like, that's why I'm like, I would not be like, if you're like, oh, this town was made in 1800, I'm like, oh, it probably has a super effed up backstory. Like the founders were douchebags. Like I would not even assume that the founders were good people. I just assume like they did some fuck shit. I would just assume so. So that's why the standing up of like, oh yeah, don't believe this stuff they're saying about the founders. They're besmirching their name. I'm like, why are you sticking up so hard for the founders? I guess it's like, right, it's fundamental that you thought your town was one thing and you're kind of finding out it has a sordid history. But I'm like, what town, what state, what country doesn't have like sordid, terrible histories, you know? Especially in this country. But, you know, like, once again, it's not even just this country. Every country's had it. So that's why I'm like, why is that lady... That's why I'm like, either her perception has been so warped because she has to have had a sin taken from her and the memory along with it. Because there's no what, like, why is she this adamant? Like, on some psychological level, maybe she was so warped in becoming this good, upstanding person, believing in these very true, non-supernatural values, that she has to go so hard in the paint, like kind of swing the other way, and she became such an extremist on one side of the pendulum. That's my only way of understanding, like, why she, once again, like, why she's going so hard in the paint against Bess and the supernatural, and then, like, sticking up of, like, oh, you don't want to listen to her, and her beliefs about what happened to this, to our founding, because basically this all stemmed from Addie's parents wanting to reveal the truth, so they vandalized this mural, but they weren't trying to vandalize it. They were trying to reveal the truth that was beneath it. And so in court, which, you know, Bess used to spell to reveal it in front of everybody. I was like, yo, this is the first time Bess has ever used the supernatural in front of everybody. And I love that it's like this court situation of like, yo, Ivan Carson being like, yo, this is the first time I've ever seen that in the world, let alone in a courtroom. It is such an interesting thing because it's like, right, a lot of the town probably discounts the supernatural. Unless you've had a run-in with the supernatural, you're not going to really know that it exists and probably would brush her off. But even with her doing it in front of everyone, they're just like, oh, she probably did some parlor trick or magic or whatever. Even if magic's real, that doesn't change the evil that it is. So that's the thing. Do you believe the supernatural is real and that she could use it for evil, or do you think it's all a hoax? It feels like it might be a combination of the two for them. I have no idea. Because Bess got up there because they wanted her to take a deal, but that deal would have meant she would have to denounce the supernatural. She would have to basically apologize and say like, oh, I'm sorry for corrupting the youth. She'd basically be locked out of the historical society. She could never go back to being the keeper. They would basically lock all the artifacts and stuff in there somewhere else, which I think is stupid because you doing that could mean anything could go wrong and activate any one of those things, and you don't have a keeper there to be like, yo, don't do this, because you might unleash some supernatural thing. I think it's interesting too because Bess was like, you know, on the stand talking about the good about the supernatural. She even says like, right, it can be used in good hands, which I thought was so interesting because I'm like, well, and we all know that the supernatural can also be bad too, but I guess it's like, right, it kind of doesn't fit her point, so she's not going to focus on that. But I think it's more so like my role in the supernatural is to educate people about it and show the good that it can do. It can save so many people's lives. And because the way that her and the Drew crew have used the supernatural has always been in response of something that's sometimes related to them, but other times it's some other situation that they're able to deal with and save lives and help people. So that side of the supernatural is what I think she's more so saying, because it's been a while since a supernatural mishap has happened because of something the Drew crew has done. Like all this other stuff is kind of other people's things. So, that's where it comes into, hey, we're saving the day with the supernatural. We're not responsible for causing the issues that the supernatural might have caused. So. But I do like I said, how that all connects of Bess's fight of let's not stray away from like, hey, like the supernatural is the foundational piece to this town. It's always been rooted in this town's history. We've seen that time and time again. And to deny that is to deny a part of this town's history. And if you do not learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. And it seems like the main lady against cause we don't know who else is really against her. She's just kind of the face of the operation now. That's when I'm like, she has some personal gain she's going to get out of this. Like, this might be some long con just so she could get the Historical Society to use it for her own means. Like, she might present herself as anti-supernatural, but it might just be like, no, I'm going to get something supernatural I need easily. Or it is a thing of, oh, I am anti-supernatural, but you're going to mess around with something and things are going to get... Basically, the court finding ruling is that, hey, all the charges against Bess have been dropped, but then, saying, she has kind of misused funds or something like that, which I'm like, what proof do you have that she's misused any, town funds that have kind of been going towards Historical Society? That kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, I was like, that lady must have gotten to that judge, or... Because I'm like, why would you... To me, that felt like that came out of nowhere. Like, where do you have any proof that she did anything of that sort? I guess, anything she did that took, funding from that the town kind of gave, taxes or whatever that went towards the Historical Society, anything she did would be considered mishandling those... I don't know. I thought that was just stupid. But I'm like, the judge came out of no... This whole situation was just the cards were stacked against Bess. The situation was rigged from the beginning. And now Home Chick has got control of the Historical Society. We know Bess and Addie were taking stuff out of there, so I wonder were they taking the supernatural items and putting them somewhere else, or are they still in there just locked away? I don't know, because they were toting some boxes and stuff, so I don't know if that could, or whether they had to leave all the supernatural stuff there, because that's the thing of, once again, either she's doing all this to get access to all that supernatural stuff, or maybe something specific, or she is going to mess around and the supernatural is going to go wild and rampant, and it's going to be up to the Drew crew, more specifically Bess, to swoop in and save the day and prove her point, to kind of shut this lady down once and for all. But now that they know what the original sin is, they have the ammunition, they have the poison that they need to use against the Sin Eaters. So I forgot what was the exact reason why they needed George to have a sin eaten. I guess it was their way to kind of they needed to summon the monster. So the only way to do that is to kind of have a sin eaten, so it would come to try and eat the sin. So I guess that was because I couldn't remember why they had George do that in the first place. Which I love broke Connor's cup that he got from his son. And I love Ace just being like, I'm definitely getting fired. And I love George came in there because Ace was like, I'm having second thoughts about this. She grabs a cup, smashes it, leaves right back out. So it's just like, oh. I do love that, aside from just that, I'm a little all over the place. I'm so sorry. But her being there for Bess after losing the case and everything. And it's like, right, that's, you might have lost the building, but that's kind of irrelevant. Her saying that specifically makes me think okay, so none of the items are there. The building's there, just none of the items are. She was probably able to take those all out. considering, like she said, like, hey, that's why Nick is going to help you make it like an underground historical society. Like, this fight isn't over, as you're still you, and you're going to continue this fight. Which I love the whole like, you know, thanks for kind of supporting me. You're, you know, what are best friends for? Because it's like, yeah, you are my best friend. She's like, make sure you don't tell Ace that. Which I was like, I thought that was cute. Which, speaking of Ace, his side of the story was really interesting because we never got like a proper conclusion to that, what that was. I'm like, okay, so basically he was kind of being haunted. Like, someone was trying to communicate with him, but he couldn't. He thought it was like this person that was brought in. She's a Jane Doe, but everyone kind of thinks her name is Mia. She's this missing hiker, but the body's burned beyond repair. Like, no one be able to identify her outside of that. But the more Ace talks to her, it's like, right, the place is, like, the thermostat or whatever was kind of messed up and gets fixed later on. And Ace realized, okay, I need it to be really cold to be how we communicate. But for her, she remembers dying because she's like, right, my hair was wrapped around my face and it's really cold. But Ace is like, for one, you had shorter hair and your hair wasn't that long to be able to wrap around your mouth. Plus, you also were burned. So I was like, wait, so you aren't Mia. So I guess I was interpreting it like, because now I realize it now, because at the time I was like, that didn't make any sense while I was watching the episode. In my head, when he said that, I thought he's saying like, oh, the burned body isn't Mia. It's like, no, the burned body is Mia, but it's saying that the person communicating with Ace isn't Mia. So it was never her spirit, it's someone else's, which is like, wait, I would assume that correlates with the Sin Eater stuff that we ended up finding out. That I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but kind of jumping to the end of it, where we find out how the Sin Eater works. And it's actually super jacked up. Like, all this history we learned was already bad enough, and then you learn even more on top of it to make it more disgusting and more, like, depressing. Because it's like, right, so we never found out why the founders ended up taking all those children and where they went, and they were never found or seen again. Well, during a little research, Nick ended up, the book that Nancy had taken, like, last episode or whatever, they ended up looking into, like, he finds, like, the hollowed out spine or whatever, the book ends up finding these pictures, each one correlating with information about one of the 8 victims that have kind of been connected to all of this. And it is the interesting thing that, hey, all these people die like every 27 years, like kind of like before they turn 30. And it's like, what was that pattern for? We find out the first ever victim, it's like, oh, was he killed by the Sin Eater? It's like, no, this person was one of the children that was kidnapped by the founders all those years ago. And it turns out, wasn't killed by the Sin Eater, well, it became the Sin Eater. Their plan was, hey, we're going to basically need test subject. And it's like, of course, it's like, well, we never use any of our children, so let's use these native indigenous people's children, and ended up testing it on all of them, and the only one that survived is the one that became the first victim, or rather the first Sin Eater. And it's a reincarnation thing. Every subsequent victim has been reincarnated as the Soul Eater. Basically, the monster basically fuses with your soul. It's tied to one soul, and it's been passed on from person to person to person, which now means the current Sin Eater is a person. And I was like, it's going to be who I think it is. And lo and behold, it is. I was like, I knew it. I called it. I was like, I knew it had to be Tristan. Like, the introduction of his character, figuring that the Sin Eater had to be someone. I'm like, we hadn't really figured out what the Glass's role in this season was, other than being antagonistic towards Ryan and Bess. Like, I mean, mainly Ryan, but like, we didn't know beyond that, like, what their role was. So, are they the ones that summoned the Sin Eater? Like, the fact is, they went out of their way to tell Nancy to stay away from their son, which I'm like, I was like, why is that? It's like, it felt like they had some secret they were keeping. So, are they the ones that summoned the Sin Eater, or was it someone else? Like, I'm trying to figure that out. Like, I guess that's where all that came from. Like, they were gaining, probably like, trying to get as much research as they can to try and find a way to break their son's curse. Or, like, why did it come out now? Because, I mean, not that much older. I'm assuming he's about the same age as Nancy. Because I would assume it was going to be like, oh, every like... Well, because basically... Because I was about to say, like... We know the Sin Eater situation repeats itself after the victims die. They all die before they're 30. So it could be that it takes that much of a toll on the body and the soul until it kills them. So it's like, because I was like, if he's like maybe like 18, 19, or 20, you know, he still has a couple more years, but maybe that shortens his lifespan. We only know that everyone that died before they were 30, and it kind of happens basically every 27 years or so. So, not unless Tristan's a little bit older than I kind of think he is, or maybe my thought process on how this all works isn't quite right. But that's what I was wondering about the person that Ace was talking to. I was like, could they be like one of the previous incarnations of the soul that, or maybe it's like someone that was killed by Tristan as the Soul Eater? Because we don't really know what this thing's been doing other than the sins it's been eating, but like, oh, I don't know, man. My mind's going blank with just like, I mean, because it's just so much and I don't know what to fully make of it all. The sad thing is, it makes that line from Nancy at the beginning of the episode that much more ironic and tragic, that she was like, oh, okay, like things are complicated with Ace, but it's like, oh, with Tristan, it's like he's very open and normal and there's not complicated. And it turns out, oh, this relationship will be just as complicated as the one with Ace, if not more so, because at least in this situation, it's like, well, I was about to say, like, at least in the Ace situation, you didn't kill him. It's like, to be fair, the Ace situation could have led to him dying, because that's kind of like the whole point of it. So a love curse almost like makes it so you could end up killing Ace. Then there's the situation of like, cool, you've kind of ended up shooting Tristan with the arrow, so it can kill him if you don't administer a cure fast enough. That wasn't even really a concern at the time, but maybe because you didn't have like, the direct hit seemed like wasn't it like in his shoulder or something, so maybe that will prevent it from being immediately fatal because of where you shot him. I don't know. There's also that, because especially with the whole thing of Ryan being like, because he made a whole point of like, oh, I don't want you dating this guy, but Nancy brought up a good point of, yeah, we should know better than anyone not to judge someone from their family, which, Ryan took it to heart. He's like, right, I should never tell you who you shouldn't date. Guy wouldn't be my first choice for you, but it is your choice who you fall for, because he's like, I don't want to become my own family. I don't want to become my own father, because he knows what it's like to have basically your father not approve of the person you're in love with, in his case, Lucy. So, but I love that she's like, right, Nancy tried to... made him feel better by being like, right, you're not like Everett at all, so don't worry about it. Which I think for him, he's done a lot. I mean, he's never been as bad as his dad. Yeah, he's had his issues, but he's grown so much and became a much better person. And I think for him, it's like, right, as dad number 2, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job, which I think he is. Either way, I'm going on this tangent, but it's just like, how this all plays out is definitely going to be interesting. We've only got 4 episodes left in the show. I forgot. I don't need to actually count it because it's the exact same number as Riverdale. But how that all plays out, when did this situation like first pop up for Tristan? Is there any way to undo it, separate his soul? Because the one they reference like the whole Charity situation from last season, and it's like, yeah, there is a direct parallel, but it's like, right, this is like a perfect body fusion situation, which is so interesting. It makes you wonder, did Temperance ever know about this? You would assume she would, but I don't know. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where this next episode takes us with all of this, with these developments. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.